A new plan to fix Detroit public schools. The governor talks education and the economy, and Israel's prime minister stirs up controversy. Stay put. MiWeek starts right now.
Recently, Michigan's economy has begun to turn around. Michigan's gained over 250,000 new jobs. We've paid off $20 billion in long-term debt. And our population is increasing for the first time in a decade. But to make Michigan a top 10 state, there's still plenty of work to be done. Step up and help put Michigan on top. Learn what you can do at MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com.
Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there, and welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. Earlier this year, the Detroit public school system got its fourth emergency manager. Fresh off a stint as Flint's EM, Darnell Early stepped into the lead the efforts to make DPS financially solvent and academically competitive. This week, he revealed a 10-point plan to improve education in Detroit. Coming up, the emergency manager joins us in the studio to talk about how he intends to bring stability to Detroit public schools. Plus, the governor combines education and the economy in his annual summit. We will look at why he thinks the two topics are connected, and we'll look at the fallout from the Israeli prime minister's controversial appearance before Congress. It is all coming up for you on MiWeek. But we do start with the Detroit public schools. Newly appointed emergency manager Darnell Early says he has one main goal: to be the district's last emergency manager. This week, he unveiled a plan designed to fix DPS and reduce the $170 million budget deficit. The plan has 10 focus areas: governance, cash flow stability, staff and organizational development, a comprehensive funding strategy, academic competitiveness, collaboration with higher education, special education, transportation, and customer service. Early believes DPS can exit receivership by the end of his 18-month tenure. And joining us now is DPS Emergency Manager Darnell Early. Welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, we have our MiWeek contributors here, as always, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Darnell, I'm going to start by saying the list of 10 points that we just listed off that you plan to tackle in the next 18 months seems ambitious at least. What were the thoughts that you had in putting that list together?
Well, the first thought that I had was that there had to be a viable plan in which to identify the key areas of reform that we would have to attack if we were going to be successful in reforming DPS. One of the things that became apparent to me as I watched this from afar, from Flint and from Saginaw, was that the whole idea of a comprehensive plan had not been put forward. There was so much time spent on dealing with the immediate problems of cash flow and budget deficit and other issues, that there was no real thought in terms of the long-term effects of some of the decisions made today. And so what happens is when those time periods ran short, there had not been enough focus on the long-term picture. And so what I did was enlisted the assistance of my cabinet staff. These are the individuals that do the work. They know the system. They're the ones that pull the levers and turn the wheels, as I'm so often want to say, as it relates to the organizations. We sat down and collectively in our staff meeting identified those key plans, and we bifurcated those plans into two separate divisions, one of which, of course, is operations and facilities and those types of things, and financial administration. And the other, which is probably the more important and the reason why we're all there, is the academic side of the equation. And so we came up with those points that we felt were comprehensive, and if we were going to be successful in turning the district around, what are the things we needed to look to? And that's how the plan was developed.
What do you think the key is going to be in your success where other EMs have failed for DPS?
Well, there are a couple of things people need to be aware of when they talk about the succession of emergency managers and what makes this different. This is a much different time of my appointment than it was when the initial appointment was made. The lift was a whole lot heavier the first time through, and then it got a little bit easier as the needle progressed a little bit further towards reform and dealing with the issues. So by the time you get to my position in this, we're dealing with a situation where there are a number of variables that are different. you know, the city's situation has been, for the most part, resolved. So that's not an overbearing concern. We've got the Educational Coalition that's working, looking at this issue as well. So there are a lot of other factors that are in play now than there were during the terms of some of my predecessors. And for me, what that means is that, you know, as the law has changed, I mean, those are things that have changed. We didn't have Public Act 436 when we had the first emergency manager. We went through a period of some instability between Public Act 4 and then back to Public Act 72 and now back to 436. So there's enough stability now to put a plan in place and to pace the work that has to be done over the 18 months that the law allows to get the work done. So it's a much different time, and I think the stakeholders are much more engaged now, and we have more to look forward to.
But Mr. Early, I mean, you've got to be sensitive to how incredible this must seem to Detroiters. Robert Bobb, Roy Roberts, Jack Martin, now Darnell Early. Everybody comes in and they've got a plan for restructuring. 10 years or more, these schools have been under emergency manager. And yes, the law changed and fuel conditions have changed, but this has been 10 years, and now you've got a new plan that's going to fix it all. Why on earth would anybody believe things are going to be different? This time they look at the city, Kevin Orr, 18 months in and out, same law, same governor, 18 months in and out, handing it back over, problem fixed. These schools seem to defy being fixed by emergency managers. They're in worse shape than they were when the state took over. Deeper in debt, academic performance not improved significantly, and a lot fewer students. Why on earth would anybody believe that you could do this differently?
Well, again, I would still argue that these are different circumstances, and the reason why I want to be the last. But
even so, how do you build trust with your residents, with your parents, that it's not? This is isn't just one more plan that somebody's throwing out there after a decade when all of this stuff was supposed to be taken care of. How do you build trust?
Well, you build trust by crafting the message. You build trust by engaging the stakeholders. You build trust by enlisting the supporters. As I said, it's important this go around that we have a group of stakeholders in the coalition that are looking at this issue. I think it's important that, as the governor has said over and over again, this is a priority. These are things that he is also going to be very much involved in. I guess the actions will speak for themselves.
Would you believe that as a parent? If you were a parent in Detroit with kids, where would your head be?
I would probably be more inclined to give the person the benefit of the doubt than to talk about what some of his predecessors did or didn't do.
Speaking of stakeholders, Steve Kahn, who's the new president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers, had a pretty interesting reaction to your plan. He called it a lot of bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo and said that specifically he didn't feel like it addressed the concerns that teachers have in particular. And one of the big ones I know that they're concerned about is class size. Class size have ballooned over the period of emergency management even. If you don't have a partner in the person who's leading the teachers, how can this work?
Well, the first thing is we've got to sit down and talk about what does work, okay? And I intend to do that with not only the leadership of the teachers union, but with all the unions, and to lay that plan out and to invite them to be a part of the dialogue. Listen, it gets us nowhere talking about what you're not going to accept and what you're not going to do in a situation as economically distressed as Detroit Public Schools. And so I'm giving everyone the opportunity to be a part of that dialogue. I would also point to the fact that the system itself, has to be corrected before anyone can start talking about the long-term benefits of changes that address those very critical issues. And I won't say that they're not critical. I'm just saying that we're fighting now for the stability going forward and reforming, because that's the only way people are going to take us seriously, is if they see that Detroit Public Schools is moving towards another model.
Was the teachers union part of crafting your plan?
No, they were not part of crafting the plan. However, the leadership of my cabinet and discussions and talking with their staff members did bring back those issues in terms of the things that they felt were
Everybody
important.
expects at the end of the month the governor to be putting out his own plan for Detroit. How does this dovetail in? Were you coordinating with the governor? Do you know what he's going to suggest for Detroit Public Schools? Is there any chance that at the end of the month he has a whole different idea of things than what you have here?
Well, I would say that basically, well, first of all, I did share my plan with the governor and the treasurer as well. As you know, those are the two guiding principles in any state intervention. And there's flexibility, and the idea is to not have dueling plans about how to fix the school district. The idea is to get the discussion started with those things that we think are important, and then you sit down and have that dialogue, which I expect to have with the coalition once their plan is released, with some of the other key entities providing education, the EAA, the charter schools. Everybody has to be a part of that dialogue. Listen, no plans, at least in my 30-some-odd years of doing this, are ever set in stone until everybody's had a chance to, be a part of the discussion. But everything has to start someplace, and so I took the initiative, being the leader of the Detroit Public Schools under these circumstances, to begin that dialogue, to enlist the services of the people who I feel are the experts. We got a lot of people talking about what Detroit Public Schools ought to do and what it needs and so forth. We need the information from the experts, the people who do that work. They need to be involved in that discussion. So I purposely did that in terms of helping to get their voice, because they're the ones ultimately going to have to run the system long after I'm gone, getting their voice and crafting this. And now we'll run it up the flagpole and see what other people have to say about it.
When people hear about the outstanding or the staggering deficit that the system has, parents naturally will think of, all right, next year, what schools are going to be closing, what services or things will be missing. What can you tell them about possible teacher cuts or building closures?
Well, I can tell them what our priorities are, and our priorities are not focusing on closing schools for cutting budgets. That's not what we're talking about. When we talk about any changes to the schools that we have now, they are configured in the long-term scheme of what DPS is going to look like going forward. I think everyone will agree that DPS in its current form, in its current configuration, it will not be sustainable long term. So I can tell them that we're going to be looking at all of those things and how they impact each other. We're going to be looking at that whole issue, as I said yesterday, in terms of new schools being established. How does that impact DPS? And can there be some common ground between all the stakeholders about determining how to do that? So I'd like to think that my focus over my 18-month period, yes, we have the financial issues, and certainly we need to solve those. But more importantly, the reason why all of us are here is to provide the best educational experience we can for the students. So my focus is a little bit different than that. I'm confident we're going to be able to come up with some design that will address, in the term of a long-term plan, the financial issues. But it does no good to fix that if you're going back to the same situation, which may or may not be dysfunctional, may or may not be impacted by a lot of the unintended consequences of the educational landscape as it exists today. We've got to get on some common ground and talk about those things that collectively will allow us to provide the best educational experience for all of the students in the city of Detroit.
So if what is happening now is not sustainable, where do you think that we're going to be in 5 years?
Well, hopefully we'll gain some efficiencies and more effectiveness when we retool and make DPS just like another educational node, if you will, on the educational network in the city. So we have to continue. The work doesn't end when you put a plan together. The work just begins at that point. So we're going to continue the progress. Hopefully, in 18 months, and this is my plan, ambitious if or not, is to be able to tell the governor and the treasurer that we have a plan in place, we have buy-in, we have stakeholder engagement, we have civic engagement. We need to talk about how it sustains itself long term.
You were the city manager in Saginaw,
yes,
and then emergency manager in Flint, two cities that have financial problems. This is your first stint in a school district. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the differences. How much harder is it in a school district, given the constraints on revenue, to actually straighten out the financial picture? Well,
the difference, and I tell people all the time who bring that question up, if you start from I-75, you go to Saginaw, you go Flint, you go Detroit. If you go on the west side of the state, you go Benton Harbor. There are certain commonalities in all of that. The areas all are suffering from economic distress. Either the school districts are in economic distress, or the cities are in economic distress, or both, or one or the other. And so the difference for me is that instead of talking about demolishing vacant homes, making sure that solid waste is collected and disposed of, we're talking about the future of our children. I mean, and the stakes are so much higher. So we can't afford to not be successful. We've got to do all that we can so that we don't continue to lose generations of young people in urban settings, not only in Michigan, but all over the country because of failure to be able to provide the best educational experiences. And that's going to take more than we're going to be able to do in Detroit to get that done. I mean, no one is naive enough to think that we're going to emerge 18 months from now with all the problems solved. But along the way, we're going to engage all those people that need to be engaged in this process, the legislature. The governor's already engaged in this, and he's very serious about seeing this particular situation change so that it can become a model for the whole state of Michigan. Detroit and Flint and Saginaw, those aren't the only school systems that are struggling. We've got school systems all over the state that are struggling. And so if we're going to be successful, we've got to devise something that's going to be transferable into different situations.
And we are going to have to leave it there. Darnell, Early Emergency Manager of DPS, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Taking a look now at education across the state, the Governor's Education and Economic Summit took place at the Detroit Renaissance Center this week. For the first time, the governor combined the two topics because he says they're so closely connected. On the agenda, improving third grade reading, preparing residents for skilled trades, and creating partnerships between the business community and schools. All right, Nolan, so is this a long time coming, just combining these two things together and putting the emphasis there?
It's a good strategy, linking education and your education goals to your economic goals. A lot of skilled jobs being created in this economy, a lot of skilled manufacturing jobs being created in this economy. What we're not doing is producing a lot of workers for those jobs. Any company that relies on welders, for example, will tell you, gosh, we can't find welders. Huge truck driver shortage in Oakland County, the #1 job listing out there. And those can be good middle-class jobs. And we're just kind of upside down in the skills of our workers. That's the governor's goal. It's Mike Duggan's goal, to train workers for jobs that exist in this economy.
What else did you hear coming out of this summit this week that you liked?
Well, I think the focus on third grade reading has been a long time coming. We have been abysmal at that here in the state. And there was this impulse last year in the legislature to deal with it with a hammer, to say, let's just hold all these kids
no one has brought that back up, have they?
Well, one of the sponsors of the bills last year says that she feels like the work has already been done and that they should pick up where they left off. The bills have not been reintroduced that way this year, and I would hope that they wouldn't be. But that was a really inauspicious start for the discussion about third grade reading. You really ought to get focused on how you get to third grade without being able to read as part of the solution. And that starts not just in kindergarten, but in pre-K and in the home before that. That's where the governor is really trying to turn the focus. Yeah. It's a really progressive education reform conversation he's trying to lead, and I hope that the legislature goes along with it.
And that's where the focus should be, Steve, because if you focus on what you're going to do in the event of the failure, instead of how do you make sure there's not going to be a failure, identify these kids early. You don't worry about it in May of their third grade year.
That's right.
You start worrying about it in first grade. Kids who come to school, who come to you, who haven't had books read to them. You start worrying about it then, pulling those kids out for special sessions, for special training, so that at the end of the third grade year, this idea of holding kids back is moot. You don't need to. Get to these kids early enough to make sure they succeed. I see that in this objective, and I hope that's where because we can't have hundreds and thousands of kids, third graders, being held back. We've got nothing to do with them.
It's incredibly impractical, and you can't do this without money. I mean, the governor is committed.
He's budgeted money.
He's budgeted money for it, about $50 million for it. Are we seeing any pushback against that, or are we hearing support for that?
Well, we haven't heard any vocal pushback yet, but last year, one of the things that the Republican majority was crowing about was the fact that they were going to do this without new money, that they were going to not try to invest in some of these things. And so I think the governor's got something of an argument to have with them about where this $48 million comes from. Now, it's not new money. He's not raising fees or anything or taxes to get it. He's taking it from other places, so that should go over a little better.
I don't think the budget's going to be an issue. I think there's broad enough success, and he has laid out the places where he'll get it from. And in truth, if Prop 1 passes in May, they're going to be awash in education money and money. So, I mean, there should be money to do this. The issue here is not the funding, it's the how you implement it. This has got to be done in a way that works. And you know, I would agree with you, Steve. You got to start even before they get to school, in preschool, making sure these kids get read to. The RAND Corporation did a study a couple of years ago. Half of African American children start school with nobody having read them a book. That's a huge, huge disadvantage. Yeah.
All right, well, turning now to Washington and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He addressed Congress this week at the controversial invitation of the Speaker of the House. Now, Michigan Republicans supported Netanyahu's appearance, in which the Prime Minister criticized any kind of arms deals with Iran. Michigan Congressman John Conyers is one of about 50 Democrats who refused to attend the speech. Now, how does Netanyahu's appearance impact negotiations? Will Congress have a role in signing off on any deal with Iran? And I think first, Stephen, we have to talk about the fact that people are still angry with the way this went down, the fact the Obama administration was not notified that this invitation went out.
Well, I mean, it's completely unprecedented. I mean, it is really inappropriate to have done it that way. It was a way of trying to swipe at the president. It was giving a foreign leader who's facing his own internal political challenge at home a stage in our country to try to use our legislative body as a way to manipulate those elections. I mean, this is off the charts kind of bad behavior. At the same time, I'm glad that as many members of the Michigan delegation went to the speech as did. There were a lot of Democrats who, despite being upset about this, sat through the speech. The speech was interesting. He made some very good points during it. He also said some things that were completely outrageous about unilateral action, about this false dichotomy between a deal with Iran and some sort of military action. I think there's a lot of gray space between that where we will end up. But overall, I mean, I just think, you know, if this is the precedent that's set, wait till the Democrats get control of Congress and see who they invite to come play out their internal politics in this country.
And was it bad form for John Conyers to not go to that speech?
I mean, John Conyers, I don't worry about him. He was the only one of the Michigan delegation who didn't go. I mean, you're not looking at John Conyers as any sort of leading example here on policy. But, and I agree that I wrote that I didn't think Netanyahu that it was wise for him to come to Congress in defiance of the White House, because it forced Democrats who would otherwise support his position and support Israel to choose between their president and him. So, you know, the one thing you have pretty good bipartisan support on in Congress is their support for Israel, and he risked dividing that. But having said that, I mean, the Congress was acting in response to an unprecedented measure. Congress has always been consulted on nuclear arms deal, and the president has told him, in this case, I'm going to make what amounts to a nuclear arms treaty without your approval. That's not only unprecedented, it's very dangerous. This sets a course for world history for decades to come, and the Congress is not signing.
But that's something
going to have to be the last one.
Yeah, that's something he said he would like to do. It's not something he's done. And I think the preemptive strike here by congressional Republicans, of course, puts him now in a box in terms of whether he retaliates or not. It just was not the way to handle this. This is a really sensitive issue. You got to work this out without military action, which nobody in this country is going to support, some prolonged ground war or something in Iran to deal with this. This is about negotiating, and Netanyahu's wrong on that, and so are a lot of the congressional Republicans.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. But before we go, we want to say, hey, congratulations on your new gig. You're going to be hosting Detroit Today on WDET 101.9
We're going to have to
FM.
make an appointment with him.
I was just going to say, so you're basically going to have me and Nolan on every week, right? We're just going to hang out and talk about stuff.
It'll just be my week on the radio.
Right. We've already done that.
We're going to bring some donuts.
That's right. That's right. Drinks are on you next time.
We don't work cheap.
And that is going to do it for My Week. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to continue our conversation online right after the show. So go to myweek.org for an extra segment that you won't see on TV. We're also on Facebook and we're on Twitter during the week, so make sure you connect with us there. I'm Christy McDonald. For all of us at Detroit Public TV, we will see you next week. Take care.